for another segment of the Front Porch Show. It is an absolute honor to have with us today Jay Eldred, who wrote the book Stories in the End, Short Letters from a Long Life, with his friend Tom Poole. How's it going, Jay?
It's going great today. Thank you for having me on.
Yeah, absolutely. We're absolutely honored to have you on with us. I came across this book on your Facebook page, and it was probably, was it about a year ago you started talking about it on your Facebook page?
Yeah, I started about a year ago and then finally published this spring. Awesome.
Because it was so cool, because I remember seeing on your Facebook page you had talked about, Mr. Tom, as you refer to him in the book, and it always struck me what an awesome relationship you had with him, because here's a guy who served in World War II, really, different generation from all of us, totally different, totally different way he grew up, totally different way he relates to people. And here you are having just this amazing relationship with him, a great enough relationship to where he trusted you to write his story. Mm-hmm. Tell us about Mr. Tom. Tell us about how the relationship developed and all that.
Well, I guess with all good stories, I'll begin at the beginning. So, I met Mr. Tom through my now wife. We had started dating in college, and I went to visit her folks over Thanksgiving break. And at the time, her mom was helping Mr. Tom take care of his wife, who was struggling with late-stage dementia. And she introduced me to him. She knew I was a history major, so she said, this guy has seen history. You really should, just sit down and listen to what he has to say. So when we had breaks and I would visit, I would sit at his kitchen table, and sometimes he would talk and sometimes he wouldn't. But after college, we got married, moved here, and I just stayed friends with him. And we went over maybe once or twice a week, and I would just sit at the table, and if he felt like talking, I'd listen, ask questions, things like that, and just developed a friendship with him over the course of 11 years. Found out later that he told me things he didn't tell anybody else, and I didn't know it, but that's how I made his acquaintance. I guess the other thing is I've often been described as an old soul trapped in a young man's body. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So a lot of the things that he was interested in or that he could relate to from the time that he was in his 30s or 40s were things that I still had an interest in. So we could talk about, the big band era, and we could talk about the different historical events that he had seen firsthand, but I had an interest in from a historical perspective.
So these stories that you compiled in the book are truly his stories. They're not. You didn't embellish them. You didn't do anything. These are his stories.
They are his stories. A couple of people have asked me, how much is him and how much is me, and that's hard to answer. The chapter about Pearl Harbor is entirely him. I went on in his papers, found several different interviews that he gave in the 50s and 60s and 80s about Pearl Harbor, and I kind of put them all into one unit. So those are all his words in that chapter. Everything else was me remembering what he had said, trying to remember the tone in which he said it, imagining, the different things that he told us that might have led to that deeper conversation happening. With older people, they don't generally jump into the deep end with their stories. They start talking about the weather or about what they saw out their window. So I just tried to put the conversations back together and write them down as if he were writing a series of letters. So the way that I describe it is they're his stories, and they're his words as I remember them.
Right. I think that was one of the coolest parts about reading what I've gotten through the book so far was the tone with which you use to share those stories. It's so I don't want to say it's colloquial in a way, but it's very conversational, and it's like I can hear him coming through it, and I don't even know him.
Great.
And I think that was just one of the parts that really stuck out to me. I absolutely love these old stories, stories from the past, from these generations that were so precious to us as a country. And we don't, a lot of these folks don't tell those stories.
No.
And that really affected me a lot. Going back here and reading these, it's blowing me away.
Yeah, in fact, there were even stories in here that I didn't know, that I only found out by piecing together things that he left in his papers. For instance, one thing that I remember, he kept all of his military records, and he just kept reenlisting every 4 years. So there was a stack literally about 6 inches thick of just his reenlistment forms and things like that. Well, I get to the last page, and it's listing his honors and everything that he's achieved, and most of it I'm familiar with. And then it lists his most important station as the USS Massachusetts. Well, I knew that he was on the Massachusetts, but he never talked about it. And so I'm like, why wasn't it the North Carolina from Pearl Harbor or the Meredith from D-Day? And so I had to go in and figure out, okay, when was he on the Meredith? When was he on the Massachusetts? What was it doing at those times? And come to find out, he was involved in liberating Casablanca in Operation Torch, and he never talked about it.
Wow.
But the reason was, and I talked to a few people, and I remember him telling me once they went into combat, and their commanding officer had them pray for the men they were about to attack. And he said, I never forgot that. But I'm fairly certain that is the event he was talking about. It affected him so deeply. His particular ship was credited with sinking or disabling five German warships there in the port.
Wow, that's incredible. I had a grandfather who served in submarine forces out in the Pacific during World War II, and then another who served over in Korea during the Korean conflict. And we, as a family, we hardly know anything what they did. We hardly know their stories, and it's only through stories like these that you really get that connection to the past.
Right.
Tell me about Mr. Tom's life. We've kind of flitted around and mentioned that. Who was he? What did he do? What was he known for? Tell me about him.
Okay. Well, I don't know that he would have claimed to be known for anything, but he had one of those lives that I've heard described as Forrest Gump-like. Mention a historical event and he might have something to do with it. I don't want to give away everything that I write in the book, but he has run-ins with gangsters. He has some connections with some famous sports people, things like that.
Not known for anything, huh?
Well,
right. I understand what you're saying, but it's just
right.
what a beautiful life, though.
If you did a Google search on him, he's not going to come up, aside from now maybe this book.
Right.
But he was born in North Carolina in 1918. Born up in Goldsboro, moved down to the coast on where I live now in New Bern in summer of 1922. And that's actually one reason why he started telling me his stories, is that I asked him if he remembered anything from the Great Fire of New Bern of 1922. That was my senior history paper in college. And he couldn't tell me much. He said, I remember my dad taking me downtown, and we walked around all of the rubble, and everything smelled like burnt chicken. And it got into our clothes so much my mom couldn't get the smell out, so she had to throw them away.
Wow, what a memory.
So that's kind of what started all of this going on. So he grew up, he had the typical Southern boyhood of the early 1900s, turned 18 and joined the Navy to see the world, and boy did he. Yeah,
When did he join the Navy, Jay?
He joined the Navy the day he turned 18.
So what year was that? 40?
No, that would have been 37 or 38. No, it would have been before that.
Okay.
Because he was born in 18, so 28, 34 or 35.
Yeah.
And then he went through basic training, and in 38, he was stationed out at Pearl Harbor. And he was still there when it was attacked in 41.
Wow. That's incredible.
His particular assignment was engineer. And in fact, by the end of his service, ended up as a chief engineer. So after Pearl Harbor, and there's a lot of story about that. Again, I don't want to give away too much of my book.
No problem.
But that's fine. He survived Pearl Harbor, came back home on survivor's leave, only to find out that most of the people in town thought he was dead. So when he showed up, it was quite a surprise.
Wow.
Married his childhood sweetheart 2 weeks later. Through a different series of assignments, ended up at North Africa on the Massachusetts. He was on the USS Meredith at D-Day, and that particular ship also was sunk out from under him by both a mine and a torpedo.
Oh man!
So he survived two ships being sunk out from under him, and he was at Tokyo when Japan surrendered. They'd been getting ready to invade, and he was part of that support operation, and then Japan surrendered, and he took the long way home. It took him almost a year to get back after the war officially ended.
Wow.
After the war, he did some recruitment for the Navy here in eastern North Carolina, was quite successful at that, retired in 1958, 1959, and then being an engineer, he got on at the city water plant, as well as the water plant for Cherry Point Marine Corps Base down in Havelock, North Carolina. It's about a 30-minute drive today. So he had both of those jobs after the military, fully retired in the late 80s, early 90s. Did all kinds of hunting and fishing and trapping. He's the kind of guy who saw land, bought it, built the house with his own two hands, and almost 6 years later died in his own house.
Wow.
So, in a nutshell, that's his life.
That's incredible. Thank you for actually taking the time to write this down. Because it warms my heart to know that someone actually cares that much about the past generations, to actually take the time to spend with them and to write all this stuff down. As I was reading this, I started regretting having not asked my grandparents more before they passed, because so many amazing stories that I'm sure could have been told have just disappeared because they didn't think it was worth it. They didn't think it was that interesting. But to the rest of us, looking at it now, I mean, it truly is impactful.
And I would love to know the stories he didn't tell us, because we know that there were things he never talked about. For example, I mentioned this in the epilogue, but there was one night we were there for pizza and some board games, and we had Hawaiian pizza with ham and pineapple, and he just mentioned the fact, it reminded him of Hawaii and his Hawaiian fiance.
Whoa.
And we looked at him. I know. We looked at him. What?
That's incredible.
What?
That's great.
And then he said, "Oh yeah, we all had them. We had luau's every weekend." And that was all he said. That matter was settled, and we could never get any more out of him.
That's incredible. Oh man.
So we know that there were more stories that he didn't tell, but the one reason why I chose the ones that are in this book is that these were the ones he told most often. And in the 11 years that I knew him, no detail ever changed. It was always the same story, the same event. Everything happened the same way. Even at the end of his life, like when he actually never lost control of his mental capabilities, but as most people get older, the story might change slightly, things like that, but they never varied. So that's what gave me confidence that these happened the way he told them.
Absolutely. Wow. I had somewhere I was going with that and forgot.
And then in the back, I do have what I've called a scrapbook, where there's certain images and papers and things like that I included that verify the veracity of some of these.
I noticed that. I thought that was incredible. As I was looking through these pictures, you see him, hunting pictures and I assume his wife here, pictures with his wife. I mean, just incredible.
And I wish that I could have included them in color, but one of my goals for writing this book, I did not write it to make a lot of money or anything like that. I did it for him and for his family and people that might want to have remembered him. And as part of that, I wanted to keep it as cheap as possible, so that's why they're in black and white. But if I could have included it in color, and he's fine with me saying this because he told me himself, his wife was a looker. She could have been a model or a movie star in the 20s and 30s, well, even beyond, if she'd wanted to, but she wanted to be his wife, so she was.
Awesome. I noticed in one of the scrapbooks here, I believe it's a bulletin from a Sunday service on the Tarawa on Saipan.
Yes.
Did he serve in Saipan? One of my grandfathers served at Saipan, and
I tried to find out how long he was in Saipan, and I could never nail down the date. I know that was on what he called his long trip home after the war.
Okay.
So I'm not sure how long he was there or where he was stationed.
Okay. My grandfather was part of the submarine fleet, escorting the ships into Saipan as they were beginning the invasion there. So this would have been after.
Okay.
It, so, but interesting, just interesting to see Saipan pop up. You don't see Saipan pop up much.
No.
So is there a second book in the works? You obviously have more stories.
I have more recollections of little tidbits that he gave me. I don't know if I have enough to make a second book. What I might do is see if I can add a few more in and do more of a second edition. But I'm not sure about that. I'm fairly satisfied with the way that this one turned out.
As I said, it's I'm 45 pages in so far. I've scanned through the rest of it just to get a good idea of the life of Mr. Tom. It's fantastic. It's one of the best. It's one of the best biographical storybooks that I've read in a long time. And so I'm absolutely. It was a privilege to pick it up off Amazon. So if anyone's looking for it, it's Stories in the End: Short Letters from a Long Life. You can find it on Amazon. Is there anywhere else we can send the listeners to find it?
It's since I self-published through Amazon, that's really where it is.
Okay, so Amazon.com.
Yeah, and what we can do, Jeff, we'll get this stuck up on the site as a standalone, probably like we did with Rubia Scott, and we'll include a link there. Yeah. As well.
Absolutely.
So you can share it out for those that may be interested.
Absolutely. Hey, thank you for joining us today. We really appreciate it. If anyone wants the book, go to Amazon.com. Stories in the End, short stories from a long life. You can look up. I found it by Amazoning, looking up Jay Eldred, and it popped right up at the top of the search pages. Jay, is there anything else you want to add about the book before we head out?
If you read it, you personally or anyone listening, please leave a review on Amazon or Goodreads, because the more reviews that it gets, the more likely it is to pop up in someone else's feed.
Awesome. I will go there immediately when the show's done, and I will leave a review.
Thank you.
Awesome. Hey, thanks for joining us today, Jay. Again, Stories in the End by Tom Poole and Jay Eldred.